Welcome, everyone. I'm Michelle Chula-Lipkin. I'm the Executive Director here at the National Association for Media Literacy Education. We're thrilled to be hosting this event in collaboration with PBS Kids. It's called Developing Critical Thinkers, How PBS Kids is Approaching Media Literacy. We all know that kids are growing up in a media-rich world surrounded by changing technology and with digital devices at their fingertips. And we all want to help kids safely navigate these experiences. And PBS Kids does this by creating engaging educational content that supports foundational media literacy skills, providing the tools kids need to think critically and imaginatively about media and its messages, and encourage them to be responsible media creators. I've been so impressed by PBS's kids' commitment to media literacy education, and I'm incredibly excited that amazing minds in children's media are joining us today. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that this event is part of the 10th anniversary of U.S. Media Literacy Week. Over the last decade, we have sought to call attention to media literacy education by bringing together hundreds of partners for events and activities around the country. In the last 10 years, the landscape of media literacy education has changed drastically, and we are highlighting both how far we've come, but also what work we need to be done in the next 10 years. I want to thank our Media Literacy Week sponsors for their support of these efforts. And each day of this week highlights one of the 5 pillars of media literacy: access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. And today's theme, Analyze, focuses on the important role of critical thinking in media literacy education. And it feels so fitting that we are here today for this particular conversation on how we can foster these skills from an early age. So please welcome, or join me, I should say, in welcoming our wonderful panel and moderator. First, Ann Lund is here from PBS Kids. She's the Senior Director of Content and Curriculum. And we have Aaron Augenblick, who's the founder of Augenblick Studios and co-founder of Future Brain Media. He is also the creator and executive producer of City Island. Dorothea Gillum is the creative director and executive producer of GBH, and Gavin Langford is the assistant director of current series at PBS Kids. Super excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us for Media Literacy Week, and I will leave it to you for a wonderful discussion, and I will see you afterwards for question and answer.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today to give you a glimpse of how PBS Kids is approaching media literacy education. And to get us started, I'd love to ask Gavin to first tell us why PBS Kids has made this a priority for some of our content.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So as I'm sure everyone here already knows, beginning in our earliest years, media plays a huge role in shaping the way that we understand and interact with the world. We're surrounded by media at nearly all times, and as media platforms and technologies multiply, they require more complex engagement and command more of our collective attention, especially from kids. And because of that, it's imperative that they are provided content that supports engaging with media responsibly, as well as thinking critically about its many purposes and messages. And it's PBS Kids' mission, first and foremost, to support the foundational cognitive and social emotional skills that kids need to be successful lifelong learners. That means equipping them with the tools and strategies that they need to navigate and understand their world. And as media has become such a huge part of that world, it's naturally come to our attention that we needed to be more specific and intentional about integrating skills, supporting media literacy into our programming in impactful and engaging ways. But it's one thing to identify a need. It's another thing to put it into practice. So I'll kick it back to Anne to talk about how we actually developed our curriculum around media literacy.
Right, so we know that media literacy is important and that media literacy skills are something that all people can use as they consume, engage with, and create media content. But as we started to think about integrating media literacy into our PBS Kids content, we knew we needed to figure out what that meant specifically for our young audience and how we could help kids ages 2 to 8 learn and practice these important media literacy skills. And one thing that we recognized right away was that media literacy education is rooted in the practice of inquiry, being curious and asking questions, analyzing and interpreting information, engaging in arguments from evidence, and communicating information. And the inquiry process and related skills are not new to PBS Kids and are important across the various curriculum areas covered by our content like literacy, math, science, and social studies. But specifically thinking about and applying these skills to media and media messages and technology was important. And we knew it was becoming increasingly important for our audience that they learn these skills. So to help us tackle media literacy in an intentional way, we worked with several advisors to develop a framework for guiding approaches and design considerations that focus specifically on how to make videos, games, and other resources for kids and families that integrate media literacy skills. The document defines media literacy for our PBS Kids content producers and helps them understand namely 5 core domains: access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act, providing examples for how video and game content can model and help kids practice these foundational skills at different ages and developmental stages, and empower them to engage with and create media in positive and thoughtful ways. Of course, the best way to showcase our approach is to see it in action by highlighting some specific ways that our producers have tackled the media literacy content challenge that we gave them. So I'm going to hand back to Gavin so he can help us see how we did this.
Yeah, so really part of what makes media literacy such a powerful curriculum focus for our content is its versatility. We found that it can be really impactful, a really impactful complement to like most curriculum areas. And we often encourage producers to think broadly about how media literacy skills can be incorporated in their shows, existing learning goals in creative ways. And we're lucky to have on the panel 2 of those producers who have worked closely with the topic and represent shows that have successfully tackled media literacy concepts from very different curricular angles, showcasing just how widely applicable media literacy can be. First off, I'll pass the mic to Dorothea Gillen, again, executive producer and co-creator of the series, Molly of Denali, to give a bit of background on the program and how it highlights media literacy skills through the lens of informational text.
Hi, thank you, Gavin. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. And I just wanted to say that before I was a media producer, I was a teacher of media literacy 100 years ago in a private school in Philadelphia. Shout out to Renee Hobbs, who was my professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I learned all about media literacy. So it's great to be here. We're going to start with a clip from Molly. And for those of you who are not familiar with the show, Molly of Denali, Molly is an Alaska Native girl living and sharing her culture. She's a vlogger. She's 10 years old. She loves sharing information. In fact, her native name is Shanya, which means one who shares information. So it's very much, you know, she's very much about, you know, creating media herself. And in this clip, it comes from an episode called Little Batty. Molly discovers an unusual looking bat in her attic and shares a photo of it on her vlog. And her cousin Randall's tutor sees a photo of this bat and sends Molly's dad an email. All of this is relevant information. We like to model, you know, that parents are, you know, there to help mediate contact with Molly and her followers. So Randall's tutor sends Molly's dad an email saying, I know that bat, it's a mega bat, it's from Australia, what is it doing in Alaska? And Molly shares that on her vlog, and the word spreads, and this unusual bat is made its way across the ocean to Alaska, and busloads of people are showing up in Molly's village, and a reporter wants to interview Molly. So that's what this clip is about.
Hey, Molly.
Hi, Randall. Can you help us get in touch with your tutor?
Who?
Your tutor, Leonard, the bat expert. He wrote my dad about our mega bat, and I thought he should talk to the reporter, too.
Leonard? Leonard is 7 years old.
What? You're being tutored by a 7-year-old?
No! I tutor him in math.
Oh no! I read the email wrong. I thought it said I tutor Randall, but it really says I'm tutored by Randall. I'm sorry, Molly. My mistake.
But he calls himself Leonard the Bat Expert.
Yeah, he's an expert on baseball bats.
What?
Uh-huh. He has a huge collection. Some of them are even autographed. Do you still need to talk to him?
No. Thanks, Randall. Yeah. I repeated everything as if he was an expert. But he was all wrong, and now I'm all wrong too. What am I supposed to say to the reporter?
You only said what you believe, and now you have new information. So that's what you say.
And I believed it too, Molly. We'll go out there calmly and face it together. Okay?
Okay. Just because someone says they're an expert doesn't always mean they are. From now on, I'm always going to check my information before I pass it on. I don't ever want to go through that again.
So in that clip, we actually skipped the scene where Molly explains to the reporter what happened. And we cut to the image of her dad freaking out because he's afraid of bats. But the important thing is that at the end, you saw that Molly vlogs the message that what she learned about the importance of questioning the authority of so-called expertise and always double checking information before sharing. So we thought with this story, it would be fun to turn the tables on Molly since she's a vlogger and show the consequences of sharing misinformation. Our approach to media literacy is very much building on the series curriculum, which is informational text. And that's basically any text whose purpose is to convey information. It could be a text, an article, a book, a website, oral history. Molly uses all of that informational text to solve problems and satisfy her curiosity. We have 15 informational text learning goals that all kind of teach various skills around creating and accessing text or media. And in fact, one of those 15 learning goals is explicitly about media literacy. It's the goal of viewing texts as fallible. And we've had a lot of fun with that particular goal. I've got lots of story ideas that I could share with you that have come out of that goal. But basically, media literacy is in many ways always been part of the mix with our approach. It was really in when we started season 4-5 scripting in June of 2020. That was around the time when COVID and there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation going on around COVID and vaccines. And we decided we really wanted to lean into media literacy. And so we mapped media literacy skills onto our existing curriculum and came up with a bunch of really fun stories and just some examples of the types of stories that we've done or that really feature media literacy. We have a Thanksgiving episode that's going to premiere next month in which one of Molly's friends shares a book about the first Thanksgiving with an illustration on the cover of pilgrims helping Native people instead of the other way around, which was the truth. So in that's an example of a story where Molly and her friends ask questions to identify authorship and bias in a book. Another example of an upcoming episode is something called Smoky Solutions, where Molly vlogs about fire safety to help prevent forest fires, which is a very sad and common occurrence in Alaska. And that is the media literacy objective of taking action rooted in evidence. And finally, we're doing an episode about the America's 250th anniversary coming up, and where Molly is curious to find out how old her village is, because she's pretty sure it's more than 250 years old. And she goes on to a website that says actually the history started in the 1920s when the trappers arrived in her town. So Molly eventually learns that that's not true. There were people living in her town or village 13,000 years ago, and she contacts the website and they revise the information with the new information that she shares. And that shows how modern information sources and tools can limit available facts and perspectives. So those are just a few examples of the types of media literacy stories that we've done. I could go on. I will say that the series mission has always been to show the power of media to help us learn and solve problems. We do that through informational text. Focusing more on media literacy has allowed us to explore the importance of being analytical about how to use media and to introduce skills around using texts or media responsibly. So GB, that's our approach to Molly of Denali. I will also add that at GBH Kids, we've touched on media literacy topics in Arthur, which is one of our series, PBS Kids series. And we've done a series of shorts, Rough Ruffman, Humble Media Genius, where we worked with Michelle as advisor, which is more explicitly about media literacy. So lots of great stuff to share, but I'll turn it back to you for now, Gavin.
Awesome. Thanks, Dorothea. So changing gears, the short form series City Island comes at media literacy by way of social studies, integrating the 5 domains of media literacy into their existing civics focused curriculum. And I'll toss it to the creator and showrunner, Aaron Agelblick, to talk a little bit more about the series.
Thank
Take it
you,
away, Aaron.
Gavin. Thank you, everybody that came out to this. I'll just say, I'm Aaron. I'm the creator of City Island. I'm also the owner of Future Brain Media that makes City Island. We're here in Brooklyn. And I just want to say thanks to everyone that's coming out, because this is such an incredibly important topic. And the fact that we're here talking about it, listening, hearing stories, hearing ideas is the most important step for becoming better at media literacy. So I am going to show you a clip of City Island. I think I will just throw you right in cold. This is a montage. We made a short montage of moments of City Island from this season, which is premiering this as we speak on PBS Kids. Moments that we are talking about media literacy this season. So there's a couple clips that you're going to see. So we're going to play that now.
We turned the corner, and there it was. Plain as a bagel with no cream cheese. A UFO! A real alien spaceship.
No way! That wasn't it! I want to believe what, but I didn't see an alien spaceship. I saw something completely different.
Your job is to write the articles about things going on in the school and make sure they're based on facts.
Sounds like fun. What's a fact?
Great question, Wendy. You're off to a strong start. A fact is a thing that can be proven to be true, so make sure and pay attention. Did you get that, Watt?
Sure, reporter, yada yada. Got it. You sure are lucky you came to me.
But you came to us. Yeah, you were hiding under that seesaw waiting for your entrance.
No time for that. Let's start the investigation. The first step is to ask a question. Is the shed haunted?
I don't know. The suspense is killing me.
Watch this show.
Play this game.
Eat this candy.
Wow, Dad, there are so many ads. Sometimes it gets overwhelming.
And sometimes things are different in real life than what they say.
That's why it's important to always do your research before buying anything that ads are selling.
That's what I call truth in advertising.
Okay, so that's City Island. If you haven't seen it before, check it out on PBS Kids. I appreciate somebody said that they like the art style. Very proud of that. I'm an animator myself. I'll talk a little bit about the show. As you could see, if you haven't seen City Island before, it's about a living city where all the objects are alive. Our stars are Watt, the little light bulb, and his best friend Wendy, who is a kite. They're around 8 years old, and it's all about them exploring the city and learning how it works. It's a love letter to New York City, where I've lived and worked for over 25 years. Our target audience is 6 to 11. And I would say at its core, City Island is a show about community. The framework is civics and social studies. I work very, very closely with Anne and her brilliant team at PBS on that. So we've covered a wide range of topics about what it means to be a productive member of society. Wendy and their friends have explored geography, history, economics, government, by experiencing the ideas firsthand. It's a very experiential show. When we want to talk about voting, we have an election for class president. When we talk about value, they have a swap meet. When we talk about city planning, they go on a helicopter ride and see all the buildings around the city. On our show, the helicopter's name is Rotor, and he sounds just like Martin Scorsese. One of the best things that I've learned at PBS Kids is that no matter what topics you cover, always keep things funny and entertaining. That was a really big lesson because I wasn't sure when I was, cracking the show. I was like, oh, what's more important? Is it the lesson? Is it the funny? You can tell the most worthwhile lesson in the world, but if it's boring, the kids will tune out, and then you've lost them already. So we always try to make everything really fun and engaging. So in our second season, we had an interesting suggestion for both PBS Kids and also CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They asked me, what do you think of covering media literacy? I have to be honest, I wasn't sure what it even meant when they first mentioned it. And luckily, they put me in touch with Michelle Lipkin at Namely, and I was immediately awestruck by the ideas and the work that they're doing. Michelle, me, and my animation director, Katie Went, we chatted for hours over Zoom about media, how it works, and how best to navigate it. It was fascinating. That's one of the things I love about City Islands. I get to talk to people much smarter than me about topics that I'm interested in, and it's always a lot of fun. Luckily, City Island takes place in our cartoony version of a bustling metropolis. It's essentially New York City. So covering media was a perfect fit. As we all know, the city is filled with advertisements and media everywhere you look. We're living in an unprecedented time of media oversaturation. I'm sure we all know that. And that's particularly tough on kids. There's information coming at them from every direction. And how can you tell what's true or false? We were introduced to the amazing group at Namely, and they became our newest curriculum advisors. I learned the key to media literacy is not teaching kids where the trustworthy sources are located. Like, oh, where do you see the check mark that means it's true, right? That's impossible. It's actually about teaching kids how to be digital detectives. Media literacy education is teaching kids to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act responsibly. You're going to hear those words probably a lot during this week. These are the 5 pillars of our plan. The goal is better thinkers, not followers. For our second season this year, we created 20 new episodes and 10 original music videos. Half of these episodes included media literacy on some level, if not being the main point. To demonstrate the importance of investigating information, we have our kids becoming ghost detectives to find the truth between rumors of a haunted shed on the playground. That was a fun one. To show the importance of telling the truth when you're writing a news story, they start a school newspaper and write stories themselves. What's the difference between a commercial and a show? I think we would all like to know the answer to that one. I know I would. To explain to Watt that his new favorite show is actually a commercial for a sneaker. They go to Science Square, that's our version of Times Square, to talk to billboards and the sneaker himself. His name is Speedy Sneaker. In addition to our music videos and episodes, we have a video game coming out this January called City Island Adventure that includes media literacy concepts. We have a game where you hunt and find products that are hidden in advertisements, as well as a racing game where you deliver messages on the internet. I think that it's important that we use every media platform we can to embrace this important new curriculum. As we're learning, media literacy is an important part of all of our daily lives. In today's world, becoming a productive member of our society includes a responsibility to the way we create, engage, and interpret media all around us. One of the most important things that I've learned from Namely was that the media is not going away. To turn it off or ignore it, it's not the answer. Hopefully, the kids that watch City Island will lay the foundation for a healthier relationship with the media as they grow older. That's some of my thoughts about City Island, and I'm excited to discuss all this in more detail, and I think we're going to do a Q&A and everything, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about media literacy, how we tackle it, curriculum, animation. If you want to talk about cartoons, I'd like to talk about that too, and I'm happy to do that today. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for sharing that, but we want to dig deeper. So we have some questions for you. The first one for both of you, Aaron and Darcia. What are the challenges and opportunities of incorporating media literacy skills into your content? One of you want to kind of take that on first?
Dorothea, you want to start?
Okay.
Dorothea is one of my idols, by the way. When we started City Island, I was like studying Word Girl specifically because I'm such a fan. Because it was like I was just saying about being funny and having an important message behind it. Word Girl to me is one of the best examples of that because it is hilariously funny and also just has so many important things. So I want to give Dorothea the first crack.
Oh, you're the best. Thank you, Aaron. And I hope you saw how much I was cracking up when we watched the City Island montage. So hats off to you. Um, I would say it's fairly easy for us to incorporate media literacy in Molly episodes because we're already there. She's already interacting with media all the time. And so the context is there. It's really about being intentional about being more explicit around media literacy takeaways. And the opportunities are just so rich because Molly is a real kid and kids identify with her. So we already have that going for us. And then in addition to that, she's a modern kid. So she has a vlog, she has a phone, she has a laptop, she plays video games. And so she's, someone who is, it's a great opportunity for us to model through Molly, responsible ways of creating and using media. So
I'll add to that, for us, it was, you know, covering media literacy, trying to explain how to be careful with the media without vilifying it, was really tricky. And that was something that Michelle and I talked deeply about. And I think I learned a lot about because I think a lot of us, especially like over the age of 30, tend to vilify new media. And you have this gut reaction. They're like, oh, everything's so crazy and everyone's looking at their phones and they're learning news from Facebook, right? You have this like gut reaction that like everything new media is scary. But, when we started covering, like, for example, I think you saw a little bit of the Science Square episode about when they go to Science Square and they see these advertisements and like even working with our writers, you want to go, I think our writer was writing these moments where the dad says something like, oh, well, remember, like you don't always have to look at what they're advertising. You can turn off the TV or you can turn off your thing. And Michelle, told us like that's not the point because like, look, these messages, this media, they're gonna see it. So turning it off is not the right message. And also, not all media messages are bad. I mean, like, like when we're talking about Science Square or Times Square, like, it could be an ad for a museum. It could be an ad for school. It could be an ad for a charity. So to just say, oh, don't look at the ads, try to just not engage with them was just not the message. So that's an interesting thing. So I think it's just trying to be very even-handed, thoughtful, and measured about what you're explaining and not to have knee-jerk reactions about the fear of new media, which I think often clogs up whenever we're talking about media literacy. People often try to say like, oh, this is really bad. We got to take people's phones away and all these things, which I don't think is necessarily the right approach.
Well, I do want to just make sure to mention, like, we're all media creators on this panel, and hopefully we are a force for good and education towards kids. So I think it's fun sort of talking about this and thinking about it in that way, in that with the things that we are teaching are the things that we are doing, and we are promoting towards kids at the same time. I think, which puts us in a really awesome position, I feel like.
Yeah, and I mentioned our PBS KIDS learning frameworks and our guiding approaches documents and things like that. And we create those to help know the developmentally appropriate ways to help kids apply the skills, practice the skills, and also how we can model the skills in the content. So I'd love to know how you all, and we can start with Aaron on this one, how do you use the frameworks and
Mm.
those guiding documents to support that the integration of the skills?
Well, Anne knows I'm the world's biggest fan of her framework because I
That's why
think
I started with you, Aaron. I was like, I gotta start
because
with my
we
biggest fan.
we learned early on, that the key to, successful entertainment on PBS Kids is that the core, the lessons, the curriculum, the framework, it has to be the seed of every story. You can't say, oh, I'd really love to tell a story where, Watt goes to the circus and be like, okay, how can I get this into something educational? I got to figure out some way to make it and I'm sure Dorothea could tell you better than anybody that like, it's always better when you say, okay, what am I trying to say? And then say, how do I want to say it? Right. So the frameworks are always key. And like, I always call it the candy bag when we are coming up with ideas for the new seasons, and for us, starting with social studies and civics, like we said, it's like, oh, geography. It's like, this idea that there's much more out there than what you see in your town, or, economics, oh, value fluctuates, So like, it's always like, oh, what's an interesting idea? And then usually it's talking with, the curriculum advisor or Anne, and just brainstorming. Well, that's kind of like, oh, value, fluctuating value. That's kind of like if you're trying to, trade somebody something and they won't trade with you because they don't like it as much as you, So you always find these like accessible ideas for kids within the framework. Now, to Anne's question about media literacy, the framework was so helpful here because, yeah, with media literacy, it's like, it's different than most of the other frameworks I've ever read because it's not as much, okay, here's the hard information, like what are the branches of government? What is this? What is that? It's more about creating the tools for critical thinking, which is a much broader concept. So the way the framework operates with, the 5 pillars, with investigate and create and act, it's more about giving advice to engage in the world in a more careful, thoughtful way. And that's tricky. It's tricky. It's fun. Once you click into it, it's great and it's incredibly rewarding, but it's a little different than teaching someone, multiplication tables. You know what I mean? And so that was I found that challenging, and the challenge was answered by the framework itself, because it's like, oh, that's right, you could just break it down, these 5 ideas, each one we treat differently. We basically did an episode per pillar, and in some cases we grouped them together in order to express the ideas. So it worked out nicely with the framework for me.
I'm gonna use that now with all the producers. It's just the frameworks are like a candy bag.
They are. All the ideas for the season are right there.
Anything that you wanted to add, Dorothea?
Well, I too am a huge fan of the framework and of Anne's work. I think our situation is a little different because we already started with a literacy curriculum, and so we kind of cross-mapped it to the framework. So and we worked really closely with it. Our literacy advisor worked really closely with Anne to do that. But I will say that one of the things that's really cool about the framework, as you can tell, is that it can be applied to many different subject areas. It has that flexibility, which is really shows the range of media literacy. Our show is a literacy show. City Island is a civic show, and yet there's still commonalities there. So, it's just a really wonderful framework that really could be applied to any show.
I'll add one last thing, just because I think it's interesting that, like, and Anne and I have talked about this, that like what's exciting for us to get a framework like this is like, again, media literacy, big ideas, right? But it's distilling these big, giant ideas that can be very, very difficult to even understand, let alone teach. And they're distilled in a very simple way. And sometimes I think that's all of our best goal at PBS Kids, is to be able to take big ideas and express them in a simple way. So it doesn't seem so overwhelming, because, kids get overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed. And to be able to say like, oh, just approach it like this, I think is helpful. And I think also helps kids feel a little better about things.
Yeah, Yeah, to have that language that's developmentally appropriate for a kid,
Yeah.
right? That they can understand. Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, I think from the PBS Kids perspective, I think authenticity and relatability are, as well as engagement, are all like key components to like a really good show, really good story. And this framework and like curriculum folds into that very, very nicely. It just happens to make for very fun and funny stories. Having that opportunity to work on both of these shows, it's great to see from both sides that it just, the situations that you can draw narratively from a media literacy curriculum are they just make good scripts and they make good stories. This is going off script a little bit, but I did want to ask both of you, was there a particular episode or storyline that derived from a media literacy skill that is your favorite or was the most fun to develop?
Boy.
That's tough. Well, I have to say, Gavin, you brought up a good point before I get to that like, the relatability factor. Like, luckily, like we both are making comedies, and like, luckily, like not knowing things can often be pretty funny. You know what I mean? Like you saw in the clip from Molly, it's like, oh, a bat? You meant a bat? I thought you meant the bat with a bit, and like for us, like almost the entire show rests on Watt not knowing things and like being okay with that. You know what I mean? And so we're not laughing at him. We're kind of hopefully laughing with him because he's an upbeat kind of character. So that's a nice thing. And you see that in all the PBS Kids shows, like not knowing things is okay. Look at Sesame Street, it's like Big Bird not knowing stuff was the crux of most of those stories. So, but as far as episodes, I love the Science Square episode, advertising. It really hit a sweet spot because for me, one, it was such an important topic. Two, I get to highlight a part of New York City that's like emblematic, which is Times Square. And three, it's always important to us for City Island when we hit on a moment or a topic or an idea where like we could only do this on City Island. And the fact that our characters were talking to the billboards themselves, and the billboards themselves, there's even like, a sculpture of, I think a cereal, there's a billboard for video game. They're actually saying like, oh, I'm a billboard for a movie that you can see. It's my job to make the movie look cool. To see a billboard actually speak from the first person, just rather than saying, oh, this is a billboard, this is what it does, to say, have the billboard explain what its job is, I think is pretty powerful. And it's one of those things that we're like, oh, we could only do this in City Island. This is great. Let's like go in that direction. So that was exciting.
Sounds fun. I would say it's really hard to choose my favorite, although the first one that I remember, at least, Gavin, and you would know if this was truly the first one that we did that was about media literacy, was called The Book of Mammoth, which was a tourist. This hapless guy comes to Alaska from the lower 48 with this book that really shows that the woolly mammoth is alive and well in Alaska, and he hires Molly and her dad, who's a wilderness guide, to take him to see the woolly mammoth. And it's just really fun when you put a character in that situation who's just incredibly gullible, and push it to the extreme, and just the absurd humor that can come out of that. Of course, there was no woolly mammoth, and it turns out that the author of the book was like a bit of a huckster. So it's just fun to kind of, there have been a lot of great stories where we just like play on the absurdity of misinformation.
Yeah, and I think I think this is representative of both shows, but I also enjoy the stories where it's not, where they pick informational text or media that is not necessarily wrong, but just not right for the application that they're using it for. So it's not necessarily an antagonistic relationship. It's just to let me know how to use it more accurately and apply it better to what I need it for. I think those are sort of the strong points in both of these series. But moving on, next question for you two. So you work very closely with advisors and media literacy experts to bring your stories and curriculum to life. What is unique about media literacy expertise that helps with developing your story ideas, or what is specific about working with media literacy experts specifically?
Boy. Well, I would say that, one thing that how we benefit is just that they're bringing such a lens to the work that I don't have. And so they're able to identify opportunities to just even small, brief moments to work in messaging around media literacy. Things like, my teacher says this is a website we could trust, or my grandpa, the scientist, wrote this book. Like just little moments that we wouldn't think about that really just kind of help reinforce, that it's important to have credible sources.
Mm.
So I think that's, one of the most beneficial ways that um, we've worked with our media literacy advisor.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, like I think that it's exciting to be part of like a really new curriculum. It's like, I mean, I guess Dorothy, you said you studied it, but it's like as far as like it just feels so relevant to like every aspect of society right now. That like the idea that like they just devised this framework fairly recently, and to be able to be at the forefront of a fairly newish curriculum is hugely exciting to us. And to, because cartoons are so classic, and cartoons have been around forever, and you've seen this sort of same tropes over and over again. So to have cartoon characters talking about something as complex as media and filtering the news and understanding messaging, it feels very new, and it's always exciting to be a part of something new.
So I have a question about what advice would you have for other show creators who want to incorporate media literacy concepts and skills? Any kind of things that you feel like you've learned about this in particular, and that you would suggest if they want to incorporate it into either their already existing content with a particular curriculum, or if they just want to go right to that media literacy curriculum directly.
For me, it's helpful, with when you have a main character that's a little kid, like Watt is 8. You really got to be in touch with your like child brain. I'm constantly like thinking like, well, how would Watt really react to this situation? Like, I don't want to put words in his mouth, and it's always I'm sure again, Dorothea knows better than anyone that like it's like there's this magic moment when you're making a show where like you stop like sort of telling the character what to do and they start telling you what they want to do, right? Like it's like it's a great moment, like where you're like, oh well, Watt wouldn't do that. Watt would actually do this. Like this is how Watt would react to this new information that he's getting. So being in touch with your child's mind, I think, is helpful for what Gavin was saying, like the relatability aspect of these shows. Because I feel like kids, I mean, people in general, because of the, social media or phones or whatever, they're very savvy. They're very, very savvy, and they I feel like have a sixth sense to being marketed to more than anyone ever has before in history, right? So like I feel like kids can sense when something feels like false or insincere. So like when you're giving them a message, if they feel like, oh, somebody that doesn't understand this thing, that doesn't understand video games is trying to tell me what video games are like. So you kind of have to be in touch with like what's going on, keep in touch with your child brain, and just like be aware of all the new media, what's going on in video games, what's going on in like how are kids' classrooms like working, like they're different than they were when I was in class, you know what I mean? So just being aware of what's happening right now is important to us.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said, Aaron. And I guess I would also say that even if you're not if your show isn't explicitly about media literacy, there's always a way to work in those messages. Like you don't have to, if your characters are reading a book or playing a video game or watching a video or, sending a text, or all of the ways that kids today act, there's
Mm.
an opportunity for media literacy there, and do it, because there isn't enough out there for kids. And, you know, as we've been talking about, you know, kids are surrounded by media and they are not equipped for how to, or like, that's our mission, right? That's our opportunity, is to give them those skills to consume it responsibly.
Mm.
So,
The
that-
you know, we started our media literacy journey because we sort of backed into it by accident, because our second episode called POV, it was actually in the civics framework. You know, it was basically more about the idea that people can have different points of view, and not one person has to be right or one person has to be wrong, that there can be different points of view of the same thing that can coalesce into what actually happened, right? That was like the civics concept. And when I was talking to our curriculum advisor, our social studies curriculum advisor, Liz, she was explaining this idea, and I was like, oh, this reminds me so much of one of my favorite movies, Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa, where it was about samurais remembering the same incident that happened, but everyone remembered it differently, and they tell it, and every story is told, and you see a different take on what actually happened, and then coalesces into the one thing that actually happened. And I was like, oh, it reminds me so much of Rashomon. What if we did that? And we created this idea where the kids are walking home, it's late, they all see something that scares them, and they run home. I think you saw a little clip of it, and they all saw something totally different, based on what they were looking at, based on what kind of person they are, and they all talk about it together. And in the end, they realize they were all right. Like, you know, it's like one person sees a UFO, one person sees a tornado, and like it ends up being a car wash, right? A UFO themed car wash. It's silly, and you know, that I had no idea that was media literacy. And I think when it came out, people started remarking, wow, that's just really interesting. This is a view of media literacy, that like, you know, this idea that like there can be different points of view that don't have to be wrong or right. And when I showed it to Michelle, she was like, oh my God, this is like one of the best, you know, examples I've seen of this idea that I'm talking about all the time. So that was sort of, and I think even Anne, when you talked to me at the PBS Summit, you're like, oh, remember that episode POV, that was essentially media literacy. And I remember you saying, like, we think that this is a social studies concept, so it works within this framework.
Well, on that note, I know we'd love to keep discussing, but I think Michelle might hop back in here and help us with some of the questions that are coming from our those who are in our audience.
Hi. Oh my goodness, I'm dying backstage at how awesome this is. Like, I literally, like, you guys are incredible. I so appreciate, oh my God, I don't even know where to start. I do have to say, Anne, before we get to the questions, that you need to know that the first time I did meet with Aaron on Zoom, he had the framework like printed out, and he was like looking at it and asking me all these questions. He was so enthusiastic. It was amazing. And Dorothea, what you were saying about like you don't have to have, like, your show doesn't have to be about media literacy to bring in media literacy comments, was like, I'm gonna, you know, come to tears. But I also didn't know that you used to be an educator, and then, you know, Renee Hobbs seems to come up in almost every other session that we do, so it's kind of amazing. But thank you so much. So we have some really interesting questions from the audience that I'd like to get to, even though I selfishly want to just keep talking to you myself, but that's not my role. So one of our attendees asks an interesting question. So PBS is my go-to channel for my kids, 4 and 7, but I also use programming in my high school English class. Today, specifically, we discussed the rhetorical situation of PBS and how, for example, the clip Screen Time caters towards 6 to 10-year-olds. What other ways can we use PBS programming in my high school English class? Have you heard of this, like, kind of the preschool programming being used to bring in concepts to higher level students? Is that surprising to you?
I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I think that's great about the content is it can be such a fun entry point, even for older students and into high school, right? It can be that conversation starter. It can be that jumping off point. And, you know, we have, you know, we're really creating for that younger audience, but I love that it can be used, to, you know, in this other way. And we have, just to know, like, we have our PBS learning media platform that's, you know, really covers content for educators for K-12. So lots of content on there related to media literacy education, specifically, you know, even geared for that, that older student. And that includes lesson plans and just other entry points to other forms of media that have been created, both possibly at our level, right, with the kids stuff, but also that's been, you know, specifically created for those kids. So that's a great resource to find more. But I love that people are using the kids stuff as well as kind of that entry fun place. And we, you know, there are some, you know, we know some programming like Arthur and others have like a real kind of following across like a huge age range, and City Island is quite appealing for older kids as well. So so I think that's great. Keep using it.
I would say even like the Rough Ruffman, like new AI stuff is interesting conversation starters. That's great. I love that I just love, Diana, that you're using that in your high school classroom. It's awesome. So one of our attendees wants to know, what has the response been from like the public, from parents, about whether there's been a noticeable like response to these concepts being, you know, put in the creative. I don't know who wants to take that.
The show, I mean, kids are really responding to the shows. I mean,
Yeah.
they're very popular. Sometimes from the PBS end, it's a little hard to disentangle media literacy specifically because it's such a natural, like it blends so well into established curriculum and shows that, and generally media literacy is not the primary focus, but I know the content that we put out that does feature it is doing well. I don't know, Aaron or Dorothea, have you had any specific responses that you can share from audience members?
I can't think of any offhand. We do get a lot of, you know, obviously we get a lot of feedback from social media about, you know, parents loving the shows and, you know, talking about how their kids are now, you know, using books more and stuff like that. But I can't recall specifically examples of like, oh, my kid said, you know, I need to double check my sources. Aaron, have you gotten any anecdotes to share?
Yeah, I mean, I've mainly seen it when I'm at like conferences. Like people seem very thankful that we're covering this topic. I think that parents are, and I'm sure Michelle's talked about this. Like parents, they want to do good. They want to do a good job, but it's really tricky. You know, it's such a tricky thing to teach. And also, like a lot of the things kids are learning it just from watching their parents, like the way their parents interact with, like, because people say, like, well, kids aren't on, you know, they can't be on like whatever news or social media. It's like, oh, but they're sitting next to their mom when she's on it at breakfast, you know. So anyway, so it's such a tricky topic to tackle, and I think they're just very thankful that we're doing it. One of my favorite things that I saw was actually on LinkedIn. Somebody posted about our show, but it was specifically about, as in the first season, this was more of a civics concept. There was an episode we did called President Watt, about how Watt becomes elected class president. And he thinks that the job of a leader is you do everything all by yourself. And he says, this is great. Now I'm president. I get to do everything all by myself. And he tries to do like every single aspect of the job, which is like, he tries to clean the school. He's like organizing the bookshelf. He's like making changes. Like he's doing all this stuff at once, and he goes crazy. And then I think it's the mayor's assistant, Ringer, played by Julio Torres, name drop, he tells Watt, like, oh, no, the job of a leader is actually to work with, capable people, smart people, to do something that they couldn't have done alone, together. And, so somebody had written on LinkedIn, they're like, oh, I was watching this thing with my daughter. She's like 4 or 5. And, it was about like learning that there's times that you're a better worker, you're a better, more capable person by, doing something with other people and collaborating than trying to do everything by yourself. And she's like, I'm so excited that on PBS Kids, they have these things that are relatable to me as a mom as much as they are to my daughter. So that was pretty meaningful to see.
That's
Yeah.
Go
Go
ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that it's like really, one thing that we think about a lot is the fact that parents or other caregivers may be in the room watching too. So we're not just thinking that these skills are something that the kids pick up on alone, but that, it may be something that the caregivers also hear, and it relates to that modeling, right? So we try to model even kind of the adult characters in the series also, using media literacy skills, or utilizing technology in responsible ways. All those things are baked in as well to the programming. And we also, just as a side note, have our PBS Kids for Parents website as well, that has lots of other additional resources for our caregivers and the kind of the adults in the space with the kids, to support them in understanding the different curriculum, and so that they can kind of further have the conversations with their kids off, when the kids are off screen and not necessarily engage with the programming, or if hopefully they're even sitting next to them and watching along, because we know that that's a really important way to interact with media.
That's actually like a good segue. Although, Gavin, I know you had something to say. I wanted to get to the last question, but please weigh in.
No, I just wanted to add that, I mean, as PBS Kids remains committed to the topic, so there is much more to come across our pipeline. We are very excited to be integrating media literacy into all sorts of programs. So hopefully there will be a lot more engagement and a lot more response.
I love what you said about its versatility and how it's widely applicable. I thought that was like a really good point. But Anne, what you were saying made me think of this last question, was about how are you helping parents navigate a healthy balance of screen time and non-screen time, or fostering more positive screen time? I'm wondering if you're also even thinking about it in terms of screen time, because I know not everyone is considering that as much as like what, like the content that kids are consuming, and like what they're doing with their devices and with technology.
Right. So, of course, we know kids are on screens for at least some part of their day, or most kids are. And really our goal is to leverage kids' screen time for learning. And we offer all families high quality educational content that's, engaging, developmentally appropriate, and meets kids' needs today. And we also want to create media that inspires kids to keep exploring and learning beyond the screen. So, using it as that jumping off point for their learning. So, we hope kids will want to like play the shows in a lot of ways, right? And engage in some of the same types of positive behaviors that they see the characters engaged with, and do things like Aaron was mentioning, the parent noticing that their child, noticing what was in the programming and what their child might be doing. We hear anecdotally all the time about kids sort of applying what they've seen on the screen in their everyday. And so that's really the goal, right? Is that like the transfer into that real world, and for kids to really be engaging off screen. And we want to just provide that springboard for that. Yeah.
Well, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for being here, for being a part of our 10th anniversary Media Literacy Week. I'm going to share our thank you slide real quick to thank our sponsors one more time for their support of our efforts. I want to thank PBS kids, just in general, for your incredible commitment to media literacy education, and to all the creators. It is just an extraordinary thing to hear about all the amazing work going on. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being watching, and please don't miss out on all the other Media Literacy Week events that we have going on this year. Thank you so much. Have a great night.